In this final video in the series, I'll demonstrate the tasks required to install the VMware vCenter server product and create the nested virtual machines that are needed in the lab environment. This demonstration assumes that you have already built the virtual machine named Center, and you've also installed and configured the Windows 2008 operating system as described in the Lab Setup Guide companion document. The Lab Setup Guide is also where you'll find the passwords to use during the installation. I'll start this demonstration by opening Windows Explorer and navigating to the location of the vCenter Server 5.1 code. I'll launch the VMware vCenter installer interface and select the VMware vCenter Simple Install option. Accept any license agreements and default parameters and dismiss any warning messages. Close the warning message about Active Directory. To simplify the lab environment, Active Directory is not used. The Lab Setup Guide will tell you the password to use for vCenter Single Sign-On. Make the selection to install a local Microsoft SQL Server 2008 instance. Enter and confirm Object00 as the VBA user password and the user password. Enter the IP address for the center machine. And dismiss the warning about DNS. Accept the default destination folder and the default port number, and click Install to begin the process. Now the Install Shield wizard installs the VMware vCenter inventory service. And finally, the VMware vCenter installer installs the vCenter server. Enter the license key when prompted. Make the selection to install a Microsoft SQL Server 2008 Express instance. Accept the default selection to use the system account. And close the warning about the IP address. Accept the default values for port configuration, and accept the default selection of small for the inventory size. Click Install and observe the progress of the installation. This will take several minutes. Click Finish when the installation is complete. Now select the VMware vSphere client and click Install. Select the language for the Install Shield wizard and click Next to begin the installation. Accept the license agreement and accept the default destination folder. Click Install to begin the process. Observe the progress of the installation. This will take a few minutes. When the installation is complete, click Finish. Now click Exit to close the VMware vCenter installer, and close Windows Explorer. Wait about 2 minutes for all of the services to start completely, then log on to the VMware vSphere client using the credentials you see here. When the security warning is displayed, select the option to install the certificate and click Ignore to continue. In the navigation tree of the vSphere client, right-click Center and select New Data Center. Name the data center Enablement. Right-click the Enablement Data Center and select New Cluster. Enter CSI as the name of the cluster and leave the selection boxes unchecked. Accept the default selection for VMware EVC and accept the default selection for the swap file policy. Review the selected options for the new cluster and click Finish. In the navigation tree, right-click the CSI cluster and select Add Host. For the host name, enter vSphere1.enablement.ibm.lab. For the username, enter root and enter the password specified in the Lab Setup Guide document. Click Yes to close the Security Alert window. Review the host summary and click Next. Assign a license key to the host. Leave the Enable Lockdown mode unchecked. Review the summary details and click Finish. I'm almost ready to begin building the nested virtual machines, but first I need to add the operating system ISO file to the data store. To do that, I'll click the Home icon and click the Data Stores and Data Store Clusters icon. And I'll select Data Store 1 and click the task to browse this data store. Now I click the Upload icon and select Upload File. I navigate to the location of the operating system ISO image, select it, and click Open. Click Yes to close the warning message and wait for the upload task to complete. Now I return to the Hosts and Clusters view and I'm ready to build the two nested VMs. These are the machines that the students will use to perform backup and recovery operations as they complete the lab exercises. As I've said earlier, we're using Windows XP 32-bit VMs to avoid portability issues with nested virtual machines. I right-click the vSphere 1 host and select New Virtual Machine. Select a typical configuration and continue. I name the machine WinXP Red and verify that enablement is selected as the inventory location. Data Store 1 is the storage destination, and I select Windows as the operating system and Windows XP Professional as the version. I accept the default values for network and continue. I reduce the virtual disk size to 2 gigs and select the Thick Provision Lazy Zeroed option. I review the settings and click Finish. In the navigation tree, I right-click the WinXP Red machine and select Edit Settings. I reduce the memory to 64 megabytes and remove the floppy drive device. Next, I select the CD/DVD drive, select Data Store ISO file as the device type, and click Browse. I open Data Store 1 and select the operating system ISO file and click OK. I need to remember to select the option to connect the device at power on. On the Options tab, I select the boot options and make the selection to force BIOS setup when the VM starts, and click OK to close the virtual machine properties window. Back in the Hosts and Clusters view, I select the Console tab and click the icon to power on the VM. In the BIOS Setup utility, I select Boot Options and move the CD-ROM device to the top of the list. Then I press F10 to save the changes and exit the BIOS setup. Now Windows setup begins, and I'm just going to perform a typical Windows XP installation. The VM restarts and Windows setup continues. Here I click Next to accept the default regional and language options. I enter the name and organization. And I enter the product key, which of course I'm not going to show you. And I name the computer WinXP Red, then enter and confirm the administration password. I accept the default date and time settings, select Typical for the network settings, and accept the default workgroup option. The virtual machine restarts again, and the final part of the Windows setup begins. For automatic updates, I select Not Right Now, and for internet connection, I click Skip. I'm not ready to activate Windows, so I select No, Remind Me Every Few Days. And for the user account, I enter Admin, and I click Finish to exit the setup wizard. Still using the console for the WinXP-Red virtual machine, I select VM, Guest, Install Upgrade VMware Tools. I click OK to close the warning message. I select Typical as the setup type and observe the progress, and click Finish when the installation is complete. And I click Yes to restart the machine. Now I let Windows adjust the screen resolution. I click the icon in the system tray to activate Windows, and because this machine is not connected to the Internet, I make the selection to activate Windows using a telephone. And here I'll assume you are familiar with this procedure and you know how to complete this task. Now I need to add an additional hard drive to the virtual machine. In the vSphere Client interface, on the Summary tab, I click Edit Settings, click Add, select Hard Disk and click Next, and select Create a New Virtual Disk. I configure the disk to be 100 megabytes and accept the default selections for advanced options and click Finish. Now I return to the console and I need to initialize and format the new disk. From the Start button, I right-click My Computer and select Manage. In the Computer Management window, I click Disk Management. The Disk Wizard launches automatically, so I click Next and initialize Disk 1. I right-click the unallocated space and select New Partition. In the New Partition Wizard, I select the primary partition and choose the maximum size. I accept the default drive letter E. Here I change the volume label to Disk 1 and make the selection to perform a quick format and click Finish. And close the Computer Management window. Next, I need to populate the nested VM with some sample data so the students will have some files to back up and restore. The quickest way I've found to do this is by using the command prompt and entering the commands that I'll show you now. So these commands may seem a little awkward to type, but this is still much quicker than using Notepad and Windows Explorer to create these sample files. I create a folder called Demo Data on the C drive and then navigate to it. And enter this for command that will put a bunch of text characters into a file called 20kb.txt. Then I use another for command to create multiple copies of that file. Now I use a for command that calls xcopy to create multiple sample data folders on the E drive. And finally, I check the E drive to verify that everything looks right. And it looks like this task is done, so I close the command prompt window and shut down the virtual machine. Now, back in the vSphere Client interface, I take a snapshot of the WinXP-Red VM and call it Start the Lab. So, building the WinXP-Red VM took a lot of effort, and I don't want to go through all of that again to create the second nested VM that we need. Instead, I'll just clone the WinXP-Red VM and then modify it as needed. With the WinXP Red machine selected, I click Clone to a new virtual machine, and I'll name the new virtual machine WinXP Green. And I can just accept all the default parameters to complete the task. WinXP Green needs a third hard drive, so I'll edit the virtual machine properties, create a new hard drive, and change the disk size to 120 megabytes. And now I power on the WinXP Green machine and open the console window. I want to make sure the VM Tools package works with this virtual machine, so I'll select VM, Guest, Install Upgrade VMware Tools, and select the Interactive Tools Upgrade option. In the Installation Wizard, I select the Repair option and complete the task. Now I need to initialize and format the disk I added earlier, so I launch the Disk Management tool and initialize the new disk and format the partition. And I'll assign the volume name of Target. Now I open System Properties and change the name of the computer to WinXP Green. And of course I have to restart the machine. The machine restarts, and there's one last thing I need to do here. I open Windows Explorer and verify that the E drive has the sample data files that we need, and that the F drive is empty. And now I shut down the machine. Back in the vSphere client interface, I take a snapshot of WinXP Green and name it Start the Lab. Then I close the vSphere client. The final task I need to complete is to install the Firefox browser on the center machine. I open Windows Explorer and navigate to the Classroom Setup folder and launch the Firefox Setup Wizard. I accept all default values, except I make the selection to not import anything. Firefox appears to be working normally, so I close the browser and close the console window for the center machine. Now, back in the vCloud Director interface, I shut down the vApp. So that completes the procedure for building the third virtual machine in our vApp, but we've still got two tasks to perform. First, at this point, you must preserve the state of the three virtual machines so that multiple instances can be provisioned each time the course is delivered. For example, in the VMware vCloud Director environment, you can copy the entire vApp to the catalog and create a golden master image for future deployment. After that is done, use the setup guide for this course and perform the validation procedure described in Part 3, Verification. The verification procedure will take 45 to 60 minutes to complete. That concludes this series of companion videos for the Classroom Setup Guide for this course, and I hope you found it useful.